have now the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, that we penetrate the cabinets.
I also want to reiterate how deeply sorry Canada is for the situation this put President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation in. It is extremely troubling to think that this egregious error is being politicized by Russia and its supporters to provide false propaganda about what Ukraine is fighting for.
Why does this government treat Alberta like a fart in the room that nobody wants to talk about or acknowledge?
I heard her say a word that I know is distinctly unparliamentary, and I think she may want to withdraw it. The word was F-A-R-T.
We love your Mr. Trudeau. His family's always been such big fans of our flag.
Good evening, everybody. How are y'all doing? Happy Monday. Hope everybody's had a beautiful start to the week. I am, of course, your host, Snow Himbo, and this is Monday, November 25th, 2024, and this is the Maple Files. We've got some interesting developments, to be sure. And yeah, we're definitely gonna dive into some stuff real quick. I had yet another long weekend, which was much needed. I think I'm at that point where I can't tell if I'm burned out from work or burned out from just existing under a capitalist hellscape, or burned out from the very troubling news that we may very well be in the final step of sleepwalking into World War III, which is obviously never fun. But yeah, we there's been some interesting developments here in Canada as of recently. So without further ado, we'll dive right into it.
With the taking the GST off here, when you look at...
The Liberal government insists a new federal tax break will bring relief to millions of Canadians this Christmas.
We're going to have the GST tax breaks for the people who need it most.
But some of the country's most vulnerable say they're being left out in the cold.
There is a great deal of, poverty and struggle around income for disabled folks all across this country. I think it's a bit of a slap in the face.
We're going to be sending you a check.
Ottawa is sending checks for $250 to 18 million Canadians who earned $150,000 or less last year. But those who did not work in 2023, like people on social assistance, are not eligible.
That sort of discounts an entire life of work in some cases. Definitely for seniors, for most disabled people. I'm a person with a disability. I worked my whole life. I can't now because I'm a dialysis patient.
Ottawa also unveiled a 2-month tax break on a range of items, including certain groceries, beer and wine, even Christmas trees. Those cuts, along with the rebate checks, will cost around $6 billion.
There are people who are living in desperate poverty who are literally not going to be able to eat this Christmas, are not going to be able to buy toys for their kids. Justin Trudeau had an opportunity to do something about it, and he chose to, again, give money to people who don't really need it.
Retired Canadians won't be getting the checks for $250 either.
It's literally a gimmick.
Some seniors advocates say the move smacks of political desperation.
It's almost like the Prime Minister wanted to come across as a Santa Claus instead of a Prime Minister with thought-out public policy.
Some of the provinces aren't happy with the federal holiday tax break either, saying it could cost them tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue. The premiers of Quebec, New Brunswick, and PEI all say they were caught off guard.
We will need to find a way to make up for the $14 million shortfall.
A holiday rollout that critics say the government should have put more thought into. Taria Isri, Global News, Montreal.
They're called bionic.
Okay, so first off, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This being, what are we supposed to do with $250? Like, yeah, it's better than nothing, I suppose. But that's what, like a week of groceries? Again, you can always leave it up to the Liberal Party of Canada to produce the most out-of-touch solutions possibly ever. Because that's what this is. It is an unbelievably out-of-touch solution. But, like, of course it is, right? It's... I don't know what else anyone was expecting here. This is like my God, this is painfully on brand for Liberals. Also, not for nothing. But I mean, when you're excluding people who are retired on a fixed income and people who are on disability, I don't know what this is supposed to do. Because for people on disability, for example, in Canada, that $250, that's like, let's see, we'll go over the rates. We'll go over the rates now. Just because, like, this kind of puts this in much more... There's a lot more context to be had. When you realize, like, what people are forced to live with here. So we'll make that bigger. There we go. Okay, so this is how much people on disability, ODSP for example, so that's Ontario Disability. So you can receive up to $1,368 a month. So that's the total every month that they're expected to live off. And again, on top of being disabled, which is hard enough, if you make any money, in addition to this, like you find like a side job or something, then they do clawbacks. So you're essentially stuck on this unbelievably flimsy little, like, disability program. So that $250, right? That $250, for one, I mean, that might go a long way when you're on 1.3K a month. And if you're thinking like, oh my God, how are you supposed to afford rent? You're really not supposed to. Like ODSP and similar Canadian disability programs, these only work if you're like staying with a relative, you're living with a friend, or you're splitting like a 2-bedroom among like 8 people, because the rent is insane and the cost of living skyrocketed too. And like the disability really isn't meeting the rising cost of living. So this is just another example of a liberal policy that is not only completely out of touch, which I think is a requirement to be in the Liberal Party of Canada at this point. I think you have to be out of touch to the point where none of your solutions really make a lot of sense from a perspective of someone who isn't like wealthy and looking forward to going up to their cottage in Muskoka. Because I don't know what we're supposed to do with this. And yes, I agree, it does reek of desperation, but that's because, as we know, Trudeau's set to get clobbered by Pierre Poilievre, who is every bit as bad an idea. But just like the states and other governments, across the West, we are seeing as I've talked about before, we are seeing a resurgence in reactionary sentiment. which comes with the territory when you are seeing your country in a decline. It's kind of a trick a lot of politicians use, where if your country's been doing one of these for a long time, any point in the past is going to look better. So you're like, for example, if you've had neoliberalism running the government, although in Canada, neoliberalism's all you're getting. You're just getting different flavors of neoliberalism. The days of Stephen Harper might look better because they were further back in the decline, if that makes sense. But that's kind of the trick that I feel a lot of Canadians fall into. It's a bit of a trap where, after years upon years of the neoliberal incompetence, people start going, all right, what are the other options? America fell for it, and even though a lot of the Trump supporters are getting a very rude awakening as of late, people like myself who are post-duopoly, who have moved beyond the false left-right paradigm, have been calling this out for a number of years because we've been through it. Americans went through Barack Obama, hope and change. Canadian liberals went through Trudeau the first time, who promised electoral reform and, serious changes to the direction Canada was going in. And, we got bamboozled. Then came the NDP. We got bamboozled by them too. Then came the Bernie movement. A whole lot of people checked out after that, rightfully so, because that was essentially, in hindsight, like the last shot, I guess, for a lot of people. But I digress. Let's dig a bit more into how seniors are feeling here, because they are not very happy either.
Hannah Von Beekum says she's furious retirees are being left out of the federal government's inflation rebate.
Mr. Trudeau, we have worked many years. We paid our taxes. Please do not forget about us because we contributed to the growth of Canada.
Like many Canadians, she is feeling the pinch from higher prices and says it's not fair that she doesn't qualify for the $250 checks the Liberals plan to hand out next spring.
If he wants to buy votes, fine, but include all of us.
The checks will only go to people who worked in 2023 and earned $150,000 or less, more than 18 million people. That means most seniors won't qualify.
I feel forgotten, left out, and I'm unimportant. And I don't want to feel like that.
We're sort of stuck at a fixed income level and falling behind.
It's just totally unfair.
The Prime Minister is pitching the program as a way to put money in the pockets of people who haven't had much help from Ottawa lately.
Over the past number of years, we have been extraordinarily present in helping the most vulnerable Canadians.
Many seniors recently got free dental care. Some families with young kids reduced childcare fees. Justin Trudeau says it's time other Canadians got something from their federal government.
I do regularly hear from working Canadians who are having trouble making ends meet, but saying, look, I don't have kids, I'm not a senior yet, and I'm facing challenges.
It seems like a really desperate political stunt.
The seniors advocate says some pensions haven't kept pace with inflation. He says Ottawa should instead give a 10% boost to old age security payouts.
It would be about $70 a month on an ongoing basis. It doesn't do a lot, but at least it helps try to keep up with the cost of living.
And seniors aren't alone. There have been complaints about the government's planned tax holiday on GST2. Some business owners frustrated with the amount of work it'll take to implement, and some premiers in provinces that have a harmonized sales tax concerned about income they could lose from it.
Yeah, so again, this is unbelievably out of touch, but that's what we've come to expect from Trudy, right? And I mean, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, this is pretty much buying votes. Let's be real. That's what you're looking to do. But the problem is, you buy votes with good policies. You buy votes. I don't know why this is so hard for fucking liberals to wrap their brains around, aside from the reality that they don't care if they win or lose or not. Good progressive policies are popular. I've said this a million times now. The next year is going to represent the perfect opportunity, if the NDP wants to take it, by looking at what Donald Trump in the States was able to do, run as a change agent, promise to fix all the things. He won't, and there's no change except like increased support for Israel and genocide overseas. But don't worry, America, you'll get your digital ID too. But as far as a political strategy, the NDP is the perfect opportunity to look at what Trump did and employ that same strategy, but offer actual progressive, popular policies. Populist, left-leaning policies. That's what they have to do. That's how they win an election. You frame yourself as a new direction forward for Canadians, and you can say, look, it's not working out with the Liberals. Didn't work out with the Conservatives last time. It's probably not going to work out this time either. We're a third option. Look at us. We have what it takes to bring Canada into the 21st century, into 2024 and beyond. Yeah, it's going to be difficult because they align themselves with the Liberals, so they kind of have that stench on them. But there does represent a very big opportunity to kind of counter this reactionary savior figure nonsense we have with Pierre Poilievre, who's just, I don't know about you guys, but I can't go anywhere online without seeing ads for Poilievre. I'm seeing YouTube ads for Poilievre. I'm seeing him on social media. Like, the right will always have access to more capital. That's the problem. You're running against aggressive messaging, aggressive propaganda, repeated messaging, the same simple sloganeering. Like, you're fighting a losing battle just by trying to beat the right to begin with, because they have more resources. So that's one major issue. Although I have to say, even just when you think this whole situation couldn't get more embarrassing, this was Chrystia Freeland's take on it. Freeland says the 2-month GST holiday is meant to tackle the vibe session. First off, I have no idea what the fuck a vibe session is. Is this person so out of touch that they literally just took vibe and put it like at the beginning of a recession? Is that the only thing that happened here? Because I'm pretty sure that's the only thing that happened here. Let's be real. All right, well, let's check it out. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says the federal government is hoping a temporary break on GST will address a vibe session that has gripped Canadians. I really hope she explains why she's saying vibe session somewhere in this article. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced on Thursday that starting December 14th, the goods and services tax will be taken off a slew of items for 2 months to help with the affordability crunch. Freeland says there's a disconnect between recent good news on inflation and interest rates and how Canadians are feeling about the economy. Something she said is being referred to as a vibe session. Okay. So the vibe session, translated, just means we are out of touch. Our idea of what the economy is, we think it's good, and the reality that Canadians are going through when they go to the grocery store, when they try and budget, when they try and pay their rent, when they look at their purchasing power, when they try to pay off debt, all of that doesn't matter because according to the Liberals, the economy is great. That's what the vibe session is. It's the same gaslighting that the Biden administration unleashed on the American people when they repeatedly said, hey, I'm poor, I can't afford anything. And they were just like, everything's great, we're doing good. Again, this is painfully out of touch. She says a tax cut is meant to help bridge that gap, excuse me, and stimulate consumer spending. The federal government also plans to send $250 checks in the spring to Canadians who were working in 2023 and earned up to $150,000. The two measures are estimated to cost the federal government $6.3 billion. So that's where we're at. That's how Canada's doing. That's how we're vibing. Thanks for that, Freeland. Again, this isn't really going to solve anything. It's not going to help Canadians really. $250 really does not go that far. You know, most Canadians, pretty much every Canadian I know, every single person I'm friends with, all they want is just like a hard reset on the amount of debt they have. Because like they're getting crushed by interest, they're getting crushed by debt payments, and all of that is because they don't have enough purchasing power to just afford to live. Because rent's nuts, food now is nuts. You know, bills are nuts. And let's be real, the main problem here, one of the main problems at least, is that, you know, businesses are not scaling up because, let's be real, under capitalism, businesses are going to need like aggressive shoving to up the wage. That's one of the main problems. Like the wages are just not lifting to meet the costs. So every year that it becomes more expensive to live, you are essentially just taking a pay cut. Every single one. So, and companies, I mean, also these big corporations, inflation is amazing for them. They get to use it as a justification for hiking up all their fucking prices. And they do that all the time. Plenty of Canadian corporations do that. And they just hide behind inflation and say, oh, sorry, out of our hands, nothing we can do. Meanwhile, people like me, like I talk to business owners. I'm in those kinds. I have been in those meetings. And I know like I know what's going on there. And like, you know, it's not good. And realistically, a lot of these companies, they're like popping champagne. What's this? Video is glitching. It looks okay on my end. Are you guys on YouTube? Because YouTube might be shitting and farting. Maybe try reloading it. Yeah, I'm checking on my end. It looks okay. Okay, we're better now. Good. But yeah. So yeah, TLDR kind of shit fucking sucks. I don't know what to say to people. We've gotta start like getting. I'm saying this to the Canadian government in general. Can you guys please just get fucking serious? Can you please just get serious? Please, like on some level, just get a little bit serious. Oh, hey, Norman. Haven't talked to you in a while, buddy. How you doing? Next on the docket, we have a story that is essentially the title of tonight's episode. Sort of. Oh my god. This is rabble.ca. It's a very good independent news website for Canadian news. Reaching the NATO 2% GDP target will mean more guns and much less butter. The requirement that Canada give 2% of its GDP to NATO could mean much less funding for essential social programs. Color me fucking shocked. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of assistance for Israel too. Don't worry, guys. The guns versus butter debate over how the federal government allocates funding between the military and social programs requires serious scrutiny as the stakes increase. At the recent G20 meeting in Brazil, Prime Minister Trudeau said Canada plans to invest significantly more in defense to meet the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO's, 2% gross domestic product target. Yet last month, the Parliamentary Budget Officer released a report that showed that Canada's military expenditures will have to double to reach the NATO 2% GDP target. The Trudeau government announced the deadline of 2032 to meet the target at the 75th anniversary NATO summit in Washington, D.C. in July. Damn. I mean, if we even make it to 2032, at the rate we're going, I'm like, are we just going to be in Fallout at that point? Are we going to be like in a bunker somewhere collecting bottle caps? Like, Jesus. However, the PBO report entitled The Fiscal Implications of Meeting the NATO Military Spending Target estimated that military spending will have to rise from $41 billion this year to $81 billion over the next 8 years. The PBO also explained that this increase risks higher federal deficits and debt. Over the past decade, Canada's military spending has increased 100% from $20 billion in 2014 to $41 billion this year, according to the latest NATO Defense Expenditures Report. At our current level of military spending, Canada is at 1.4% of GDP and ranked 7th highest among the 32 transatlantic allies and 16th highest in the world. At the G20 press conference in Rio de Janeiro, Trudeau also discussed Canada's plan to modernize the North American Aerospace Defense Command for a cost of $38.6 billion and the purchase of a new fleet of submarines that is estimated at $100 billion. I'm sorry. Like, the West really needs to understand how unbelievably out of touch this is. Especially like for what we saw with these conflicts like Ukraine and all the money. America's a perfect example. Throughout the Biden administration, Americans basically saw as they were starving and getting evicted because they can't afford rent and having to choose between keeping the lights on and feeding their families, as they were struggling and their material conditions were nearly nothing, they had to watch their government just fork over crazy amounts of money to Ukraine, to Israel, to funding these wars. And I feel like that was a major factor that nobody really addressed. It's like, that's pretty tone deaf. And we do the same thing here up in Canada. Last year, which was the hottest year on record with out-of-control wildfires, Ottawa announced costly, carbon-intensive defense purchases. $19 billion for F-35 fighter jets, $3.6 billion for strategic refuelers, and $2.5 billion for armed drones. Again, just priorities. This is, I feel like the average Canadian is really happy with the way we're spending their tax money. These weapon systems do not make Canadians more secure, but exacerbate the climate crisis and poverty. Across the country, there are more homeless encampments and food bank queues. Communities are unprepared for extreme weather events like heat waves, droughts, and flooding. There are opportunity costs or benefits lost to military spending. An additional $40 billion per year for the military will come at a cost to urgently needed investments in affordable housing, healthcare, education, renewable energy, and environmental protection. And as a note, let me just say, it is quite the coincidence that at the exact time that in order to pay for all of these insane military expenditures, the Conservatives are selling themselves as the party of change. Again, it requires me to don my tinfoil hat, but it's a little convenient. Especially when Conservatives have been known to just kind of get into the government, slash a bunch of shit for the rich friends, and then drive the economy right off the cliff. Great stuff. Ottawa's inadequate spending for domestic needs matches Canada's miserly funding for biodiversity, climate finance, and sustainable development. At the Biodiversity Summit in Colombia this year, Canada announced a mere $63 million for new projects to protect nature. Ottawa pledged a paltry $16 million for the Loss and Damage Fund to aid developing countries coping with natural disasters. Worse still, Canada has never met the United Nations objective of 0.7% of gross national income for official development assistance. By contrast, last month, the Trudeau government announced another $64.8 million for more guns and ammunition to Ukraine. Since February 2022, Canada has given $4.5 billion in military assistance to Kiev to prolong, not end, the tragic war in Ukraine. And the reason why a lot of people say prolong is because the West has a very troubling history in preventing any kind of peace negotiations whatsoever to end this conflict. Because, of course, war is a racket, and, you know, any conflict that they can benefit the military-industrial complex, they'll do what they can to keep it going. The UN has repeatedly sounded the alarm that the world is not on track to reduce emissions under the Paris Agreement or achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 because of inadequate investment. With ever-rising military spending, Canada cannot meet its UN goals and G20 commitments to build a just world and a sustainable planet while leaving no one behind. Though the G20 Rio de Janeiro leaders' declaration did not mention defense budgets, it did state, "Only with peace will we achieve sustainability and prosperity." Federal government must not only abandon its plan to meet the NATO 2% GDP target, but withdraw from the alliance, which a lot of us have been saying for a long-ass time. This doesn't make sense. Okay? The whole purpose of NATO historically had everything to do with the USSR, which has now collapsed. And despite all of the propaganda that Putin wants to like take over the world with maniacal laughter and whatever, it's been repeatedly stated from the horse's mouth that that's not the intent. You can cope and say he's lying, but then really we're just in a battle of narratives. In my personal opinion, what needs to happen is both of these sides need to block out Western influence completely and just come to the table and figure out a way to end this shit. especially given how scary these recent developments, which I'm sure y'all have been watching as intently as I have, us being not World War III enjoyers, the majority of us being World War III not enjoyers. Ottawa needs an independent foreign policy and to work cooperatively with the international community on common security, peace, and development. These are the messages that activists will be bringing to Montreal as they protest Canada's involvement in the US-led military alliance during the NATO Parliamentary Assembly from November 23rd to the 25th. So that happened this week. So that was from Tamara Laurent. Very well-written article. I'm definitely a fan, and I absolutely agree. Canada really needs to start, like, prioritizing. Unless they want some kind of, like, proletarian revolution on their hands, which keep doing what you're doing, I suppose. Canada really needs to start prioritizing. When Canadians are losing their homes and barely getting by, and everybody I know is barely getting by. Everybody I know. Even people who are making, my family members who are making fairly good money. Like, good money to the tune of, like, oh my God, you'd think they're not really struggling. They're struggling. Everybody I know is fucking struggling. In times like this, we should not be... I mean, no country should, really. No country should be committing this much of its resources to any kind of military conflict. When the material conditions of the citizens of the country are this down bad. And like I said before, we crunched the numbers here at the Maple Files. You know, Canadians are not doing well with debt. They have no more purchasing power. It's real bad. And whenever Canadians see this kind of wealth movement that does not benefit them whatsoever, they basically take that, they look at their government saying, fuck you. And that's what gives rise to reactionary savior figures like Pierre Poilievre. Because he will just get up there and lie and say, yep, I'll fix all the problems. I'll stop all the wars. It'll be Canada first. Everything will be amazing. We're going to make Canada great again, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, we've all seen what happens when the Conservatives take power. Furthermore, I mean, up here in Canada, our Conservatives aren't even that different. Not that America's any different in that regard either, but it's like these people vote with Liberals all the time. They're very ideologically compatible. Which is why I said earlier, this presents a really good opportunity for the NDP to take advantage of this. But I highly doubt they will. Budget-wise, they're hurting too, so I'm not blaming all of it on them being largely ineffective as a party. But alas, I digress. We have some more troubling news. And this just broke. It's just broke now, so we're going to be hopping in here. Donald Trump has leveled his most severe threat against Canada in years, warning that on his very first day on office, and again, like we've covered before, this is the stupidest idea, not just for Canada, but also for America. American businesses are getting completely fucked because of this. Just so we're on the same page. This is a level of economic literacy that should not exist in the world. He warned on his very first day in office that he might impose punishing economic sanctions across North America. The U.S. president-elect threatened Monday evening to slap a 25% import tariff on all products entering the country from Canada and Mexico on January 20th, 2025, his inauguration day. He used his Truth social media account to deliver the warning, which began with a complaint about migration and drugs spilling across the northern and southern border into the U.S. So I guess Canada's Mexico too now. I guess we're both Mexico. I don't know. Then he foreshadowed a damaging import fee that would drive up costs for Canadian and Mexican exporters, making their products less attractive while also potentially raising costs for American consumers. Potentially is interesting wording, considering America as a country does not really produce anything. Potentially should be most likely, because it is going to raise costs for the majority of working class Americans. This is what you do when you are looking to tank your fucking economy. I don't know what else to say about it. On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. Trump posted after complaining about a caravan of migrants approaching through Mexico. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time that they do, it is time for them to pay a very big price. Fucking brain dead. I don't know what this is so stupid. Trump has leveled similar threats before. It's unclear whether Trump intends to proceed with the ideas described or whether it's a negotiating ploy to extract certain actions. What do you want Canada to do, dog? Jesus, naughty. Are we even thinking here? Anyway. And again, in case anybody forgot, he did impose tariff his first term on steel and aluminum before the countries could negotiate an exemption. And exactly as expected, it did nothing but make everything more expensive for fucking everybody. So I like how they actually added this. This is a level of actual thought processing which is very rare from MSN. So kudos to them for not being completely brain dead. What's unclear is how this tariff threat squares with one of Trump's major promises of the campaign, to lower the cost of living in general for Americans and the cost of gas in particular. Because yes, oil is Canada's #1 export to the United States. A 25% levy on oil would mount to challenge that seminal election promise. But don't worry, guys. He doesn't have a good track record on keeping election promises, just like no other American politician does. They're very consistent with liberals in that regard. Right. Now, this week on I Told You So, because we did cover this. We covered this before in Politically Homeless, and I will be going into further detail Thursday night on Snow Hemble Stream, so be sure to check that out. It is an emotional time for BC poultry farmers who have had to cull thousands of birds. Mark Siemens is a third-generation egg farmer in BC's Fraser Valley, and he recalls his grandfather sharing a story about fighting an unknown disease that raced through the farm decades ago, forcing him to cull the entire flock. I believe I know what disease that... I think it's Mareks disease. Hold on. Actually, let's all look this up. Pretty sure it's Mareks disease. Marek's disease in poultry. Yep, that's the one. Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. Siemens didn't expect to be fighting a similar fight so many years later. He noticed some birds seemed agitated a few weeks ago, showing symptoms of itchy eyes, and said he immediately called the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. The verdict was in by the end of the day. His chickens were infected with the highly pathogenic H5N1 variant of avian influenza, bird flu. It's super sad, and it's a tough thing to go through when you know you care about these animals and you do everything you can to keep them healthy and make sure they're looked after, Siemens said in an interview. His business is one of about 4 dozen flocks, most of them commercial, that have been infected with avian flu in British Columbia this fall. Infections flare during migratory seasons, as wild birds are considered the chief cause of infections. Almost 7 million birds have been culled at BC farms since the spring of 2022. There were 45,000 birds on Siemens Farm, including 30,000 egg-laying hens and 15,000 chicks. It's a very emotional and stressful time, said Siemens, whose barns are now fully empty. And you just feel like you have this daunting, overwhelming task of trying to get everything started up again that really took years of building up, he said. They are now working to clean and disinfect in collaboration with the inspection agency to ensure that the barns are sanitized from ceiling to floor. BC's poultry industry would raise its biosecurity level to red last month, the highest level. Sean Hall, a spokesman with the BC Poultry Association, said the current outbreak is very concerning for poultry and egg farmers, many of whom run family operations and the farm is their only livelihood. Agriculture Minister Lana Popham said in a statement that the avian flu is taking a heavy emotional toll on poultry producers. BC poultry farmers are incredibly resilient, and I've seen firsthand how they come together to support each other during these challenging times. Derek Jansen has a poultry farm in Langley, BC, and said he's very concerned as the avian flu races through farms like wildfire this year. Jansen said he's still haunted by having to cull his entire flock of 236,000 birds in December 2022 and has implemented a lockdown on his farm, keeping gates closed and minimizing any traffic. We basically have feed trucks that come to the yard to deliver the feed and an egg truck that comes on to pick up the eggs. And other than that, we don't have too much traffic. He and his workers use personal protective coveralls, boots, gloves, and proper N95 type masks while on the farm, Jansen said. Siemens, too, said protective gear is standard on his farm. When avian flu infections began in the area, they became vigilant, limiting the number of workers on the site and doing everything they could to keep the virus out of the barn, Siemens said. But his chickens still became infected. Siemens said he let all his workers take 2 weeks off during this high-risk time while a third-party contractor came in to do the cleaning process, costing him several $100,000. I didn't want to put my workers through the emotional strain of that, but also to just not have them worried about getting sick, said Siemens. A teenager is in hospital with the H5N1 variant of avian flu, but health officials have said the teen had no connection to any poultry farms, and it's unclear how the person contracted the disease. Siemens said after suffering from the loss, he didn't even have the energy to worry about his health being at risk. As farmers, we will typically run ourselves into the ground to try to make sure our animals stay healthy, said Siemens. Jansen said he understands the pain that Siemens has been through, recalling the day trucks filled with CO2 arrived to euthanize the birds, and the supervisor asked him if he could turn off the fans to allow the carbon dioxide to do the work. At that point, I kind of lost it. I broke down and then turned the fans off, and I walked out of the barn, and this is unbelievable. And within a couple of minutes, they were all gone. He said the association is working with health authorities to minimize the risk to farmers and their workers while actively monitoring for sick animals. The poultry and eggs that British Columbians buy in the grocery store are raised by farms in the region, and we're committed to continuing to provide local food, said Hall. Siemens has had some promising news of sourcing some chicks for January. We're looking forward to placing some chicks in the new year, and after that we'll start having eggs again, which will be a really exciting day here. But there's still the compensation process to get through with the government, which will help to pay some of the bills, he said. He said his grandfather, who came to Canada long ago as a Russian refugee and is now in his mid-90s, gives him hope and strength. Siemens said the history of his grandfather's trouble with his flock is a good reminder about resilience. We've been here before as a family, and we'll get through it again, said Siemens. So, why did I go through that article? Couple main takeaways here. Number one, I want you guys to pay attention to the way that the corporate press, especially like MSN, MSNBC, CNN, how they're covering bird flu. They are not mentioning pathology like at all. They're not mentioning fatality rates. They're not mentioning any threat to personal health. The focus here is almost entirely on livestock. They're focusing on how it's affecting farms. They're focusing on manufacturing consent for culling large amounts of wildlife. And I think more people on the left need to start talking more about this, because I've only seen people in the like weird MAGA sphere talking about the whole they're coming after your livestock. They're trying to get rid of meat. You will eat the bugs, etc., etc. But I do find it extremely weird how after we went through a pandemic, a second pandemic, which yes, if we have another pandemic within such a short period of time, you should be suspicious, because this is like this is not how any of this works. But that's another story. My point is, they are almost solely focusing on the food supply, primarily the meat supply. I believe there's another story about beef as well. Let me try and find that real quick. Oh, Lord. All right, well, this ain't great news, but a bird flu vaccine might come too late to save us from H5N1. So yeah, it's infecting cattle workers. Scanning here. So again, the narratives we're seeing are focusing very heavily on livestock. It's not just the chickens we got to worry about now, it's the cattle. All right. I feel like the only meat group that they really can't kind of take advantage of is fish, which is fine by me. I could eat salmon every day for the rest of my life, easily. Salmon, cod, you know, I'm a fish demon. But I do find it really curious how much of a focus the media is placing on the food supply. Because I'm sorry, maybe it's just me, but after going through a pandemic already, I would be way more worried about, I don't know, is there going to be another pandemic? And it seems like everybody primarily seems interested in nothing further than, at least the media, the powers that be, the top-down information. It's all heavy on the, well, looks like our farms are in trouble. Yep, we got to cull the chickens, we got to cull the cows, you know. And I'm just saying, if an article comes out that says that miraculously crickets are immune to bird flu, I think that might be flying a little too close to the sun. But I think, okay, I have to look it up now. I have to look. I'm sure there isn't an article. No. I was just checking if the corporate press had the gall to release some kind of like op-ed where they're like, hey, we're scared about bird flu, so why don't we eat crickets? Anyway. All right, everybody. That's about it for me for tonight. Just wanted to pop in and give everybody an update on the ongoings up here in Canada. How useless our politicians are. How ridiculous the amount of money we send to foreign conflicts that we should be staying out of, and instead spending that money helping the working class of Canada, which should be the default for any country. And the narrative surrounding bird flu, which, again, like every article I've come across, it's hit the same beats. Excuse me. It's hit the exact same beats. Farms are in trouble. It's infecting cows, infecting chickens. I'm just noticing shit. I don't have a preconceived bias here. I just, you know, read enough books. And I've said this before, but like the whole eat the bugs angle, that isn't even new. Karl Marx talked in great detail about gruel and its relation to peasants. It's the same sort of shtick. What's the lowest amount of protein, the lowest amount of nutrition we can provide workers to prevent them from keeling over dead? That's essentially what we're up to here. So, anyway, much thanks to everybody for tuning in tonight. Be sure to check out Indie News Network, INN, for listening to the rest of the shows. We have, I'm very happy with how Snow Himbo Streams has been going so far. We've had a lot of fun. This Thursday, it'll be about the same. We're gonna have a lot of fun there, digging into some crazy developments. One being both Ingress and Pokemon Go, and a kind of follow-up to that whole craze that swept the world by storm. So be sure to tune in for that. But as always, keep questioning everything. I am Snow Himbo, and I hope all of you